So I'm Bob, and I guess I would identify myself as an addict codependent. That's a term that I discovered in therapy years ago. I really didn't want to do this today. I signed up for it last month, and it's been spinning around in my head. And I guess the reason I don't, I'm reticent to share my history is there's a lot of shame attached to it. And my life, it's not just about relationships, it's about who I ended up becoming to try and get relief from my dysfunctional childhood, my unhealthy relationships I got into, and the drugs and other addictions that I use to mask this massive amount of feelings that happened to me. So I'll give you a little, I don't want to get too, it's a big story. It's been went on for a long time. So I was brought up in an alcoholic household. My dad worked for the railroad, and my earliest recollection was, I don't know, 6 years old or something like that. We lived in a little house in Vancouver on the west side, and my earliest recollection was my dad made beer, and he was an alcoholic. And I can remember when I was really young, and I had some blockage. I'll get into what I did about that, about remembering. But I remember getting up, and the house was cold. The blinds were all pulled, so it was kind of dark. And my parents were in their bedroom sleeping off the night before, and the whole house smelled like alcohol. And I can remember there was a little TV show I used to watch with this woman called Wanda. And she was dressed up like a little green pixie. And I used to sit and watch this show. And what I got from this show was this woman knew that she was reaching out to children in TV land. And she was trying to emotionally connect with children out there. And I was one of these children that felt really alone and afraid. And I can remember feeling some comfort from this woman that was doing kind of this nurturing thing over television. So my parents' relationship as I grew up was really tumultuous. They were both immature. My mom had a pill problem. My dad had this alcohol problem. And there was a lot of fighting. And so what ended up happening to me was I became a surrogate for both of my parents, an adult child. I had one immature parent on this side. They would get in these fights, and my dad would come to me, and he would complain about my mom. And I would try and support this adult emotionally and talk to him about what had happened, his feelings of anger towards my mother. And then I'd get my mother coming at me, and she would be complaining and in her emotional turmoil about my father. So I was constantly in the center of this dynamic where I'm a little kid and I'm trying to emotionally support two immature parents that were angry and upset with each other most of the time, which set me up. That's my original setup for being a codependent, the caretaker. How it ended up going from there, at about 10 years old, I became addicted to food. That was my first addiction. My mother, I had to find out later in life what had as I got in recovery like 38 years ago. And my first CODA meeting was in the early 90s. And as I started piecing this stuff together, I started searching for answers to what had happened to me. And it's so complex, it's kind of hard for me to describe. Anyway, in order for me to eventually, once I got into recovery, I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but I'm trying to describe how I started to get aware of what had happened. I have an older sister, and I knew I had some really big abandonment issues. It wasn't just the being surrogated by my parents. They didn't give me what I needed emotionally. Neither are more affectionate. They didn't hug me, so there was an abandonment issue there. But there was something bigger that had happened. So I couldn't remember it, so I went to my older sister. She said, well, yeah, what happened was my mom had some, she kept having nervous breakdowns. She would have mental health issues. And so she, when I was just a few months old, she had her first shock therapy treatment for depression. She had depression. So my older sister said, well, yeah, you got abandoned. This is what happened. Mom went in for the shock therapy. It so flatlined her emotionally that she came home and she could not be a mother to you. She just couldn't hold you. She couldn't do anything. So that was my first thing that happened to me. I don't remember it. And then several years later, I was probably 4 or 5, it happened again. She had to go back in for the shock therapy, which is how they treated people for depression back then, and same thing. She came home, she was just this zombie and couldn't be a mother to me. So that's where my really big emotional abandonment stuff happened. So I'm going to skip forward to when I started addictions. Food was first, and the reason for food was one thing my mom did do to nurture us was she was a tremendous cook. And she'd do the same thing for my dad. She'd make these meals, and that was her way of nurturing my father and me. And so we get this stuff twisted in our head about, we don't know. It's just a way to get our needs met. Somehow, be loved. It's loving and mattering. We try and find ways that we are loved and get love and mattering, and it can be warped and sick in different ways. And so, to me, eating was how she loved me. So I became addicted to food, and that was my first addiction. So when I got older, at 16, I started drinking with my friends, and here comes the girls, and I turned into this, my thing with dealing with my feelings was about drugs and alcohol, and I went up the ladder with drugs, eventually became a heroin addict, IV drug user at 25. My need for attention and love and nurturing was, of course, through women, because my mother was my main caretaker. My dad worked constantly, so I was basically my mother's surrogate. So I adored my mother and constantly sought love from her, which I didn't get. I got attention, but I didn't get love and nurturing and holding and all that stuff. So when I got old enough at 16, I immediately went for girls, and I had no idea about how to be a healthy male with a woman. To me, it was all about sex. There was no talk in my family about sex or intimacy or nurturing or any of that kind of stuff. So I just kind of, like all the rest of my peer group, crashed out there in the world, and it was all about sex. And again, in my mind, and not even a conscious thing, a subconscious thing, I'm looking for loving and nurturing, and my solution is to get close to a female is through sex. So I became a sex addict at an early age, and I was this one girl I had a significant relationship when I was 16. I had another one when I was 18. They were a little healthier. They were longer term relationships, but I just continued on. After those relationships failed, I think I made some kind of internal decision unconsciously that getting too close to a woman created pain, and so my thing became just one girl after another for years. And as soon as I sensed that the girl, I'm a love addict, and I'm going to take a little brief thing here. There's two dynamics about love addiction. In love addiction, you have an avoidance addict and you have a love addict. The love addict is the person that gloms on to their partner and suffocates them. And this is through their abandonment and abuse issues. They do this. They pick partners that are usually emotionally unavailable. The avoidant, who's the emotionally unavailable partner in this love addiction duo, they like seducing. There's seduction involved. There's seducing in the love addict. But then it's kind of the same dynamic. Both people are afraid of intimacy. They don't know how to do intimacy, and so it becomes this tumultuous relationship where the love addict starts chasing after the avoidance addict to get their needs met emotionally and physically, and the avoidance addict having this pressure of this addictive person. They're both addicts, don't get me wrong, starts running the other direction, usually to another relationship, to another addiction, and then they go back and forth in this dysfunctional, unhealthy, painful relationship. So that's the kind of relationships I ended up getting into. And usually they didn't go that far. I would just go from girl to girl. And some love addicts, avoidance, a person like me, can have dynamics of both addict. When you have love addict parts of your personality, which you're constantly trying to grab someone and pull them in. And then you have the dynamic of the avoidance addict. When you sense that someone is there for you, you get fearful about intimacy because you don't know how to do intimacy, and so you run. The avoidance runs away from the relationship. So that's what I did for most of my life. When I started going to CODA, this stuff started making sense to me, and I started going to therapists. I've been to so much therapy. When I was in Narcotics Anonymous for a number of years, I got into a relationship at about 3 years clean and sober with a woman that was a normie, which you guys all know a normie is supposed to be somebody that's not an addict, an alcoholic, they're healthy, but that's bullshit. There's no such thing as a normie. It's an illusion that alcoholics and addicts have that because they aren't in recovery, they're a normal person. Well, I got in a relationship with a woman by the name of Paula, and she was beautiful, and she was sexy, and we had this intense sexual thing going on. But I was the love addict, and Paula was the avoidant. And I didn't know too much about this stuff. I had some idea about this bare knowledge. So our relationship got really intense. It was we both abandoned our children every weekend. I had a son, she had a daughter. Every weekend we would both farm out our kids so that we could have a sexual, intense weekend together. We did that for 3.5 years. What ended up happening, Paul and I both realized we had a problem, and I started getting some help. I went to a codependency therapist in Vancouver, but the weirdest thing happened to me, and I've told a couple of people in here about this. We were driving up here, I think, to this place, to a CODA meeting or something one day, and we went by New Renaissance Bookstore. And at this point, my concept of who I was Bradshaw stuff and Melody Beattie, Codependent No More, and just all these pieces. I was trying to figure out who the fuck I was and what was wrong with me. I knew I was an addict, but I didn't know. I was starting to get some idea of all this family stuff that was driving it, and I knew that I was going to have to work through it in order to maintain sobriety and get healthier. But I didn't have a clue. I just had like a big puzzle. It's like when you throw the big puzzle out and you're just looking at the pieces and you're trying to figure out how to get some pieces together. So Paul and I were driving up here, and I went past New Renaissance Bookstore, and something told me, you need to stop and go in New Renaissance Bookstore. And this, I swear to God, this is the craziest thing. So we get out. I don't know if any of you have ever been to New Renaissance, but it's like a maze in there. There's thousands of books, and their little corridors go all over the damn place. So I walk in there. Paul's following me. I just start walking through this maze, up and down aisles. Now, something was leading me to a place. I finally got to the very back of the store. In this little corner, here's this little bookshelf with all these books in it. And I walk up to it. She's right behind me. I look down. Something tells me to look down. Here's this little robin egg blue book. One copy of this book on the bottom of the shelf. I go right for this book. And I'm telling you, there's thousands of books in there. But something's telling me I was being guided. I pull this little book out, pull it up. She's looking over my shoulder. Says Facing Love Addiction by Pia Melody. So we turn it over and we start reading, and this is a big, huge burning bush. Aha, oh my God, this is me and us. And Pia Melody describes this, what I've been describing to you about the love addict and the avoidant. It's codependency is the core issue from our original childhood abandonment and abuse issues. But out of our original abandonment and abuse, this isn't what I'm talking about, who I am, doesn't necessarily apply to everybody in here. We all have our different flavors of histories and how it's affected us emotionally, our addictions, our relationships. But me particularly, I was a love addict and some avoidant. What I ended up doing was I ended up going to, I think my codependency therapist in Vancouver referred me to a guy in Portland by the name of Larry Rogers. And Larry Rogers is a hypnotist, or he does hypnosis for people with codependency issues and addiction issues around relationships. So I went to Larry Rogers. In fact, I took Paula with me, and I was in really big denial about, I was this big victim. By the way, Paula was having an affair on the side. part of her history as being an avoidant was avoidants often have affairs. When the relationship's too intense, they go outside of the relationship and have another relationship. So this stuff was kind of going at a low boil with Paul. I knew something was wrong. God, how do I wind this up? How long have I got?
5 minutes.
All right. So what Larry Rogers did with me was I scoffed at addiction or hypnosis. I thought it was bullshit. But I went along with this thing with Larry. Paul and I ended up splitting up on the advice of our codependency therapist, which I chased around for months, put notes on her door, peeked in her window, stalked her, not with intent of maliciousness. I just was super jealous, super paranoid. I knew she had another boyfriend. I basically went crazy. Had a nervous breakdown. But anyway, when I went to Larry Rogers, he did this thing where we went back to my original abandonment, which was the house on the west side, my parents in bed, smell of alcohol. I'm this lonely little kid that's scared to death. And what he did is he took me back through to re-experience that original abandonment, which, I did sobbing and crying and getting all this grief work. I did all this grief work with Larry. And then what he did was he took me to, after we got through, and he would have the soft music playing, and he would record, he would ask me questions about, was having me try and reparent my wounded inner child. That's how his thing went. First go through the grief, then teach you how to reparent your wounded child. And so when he makes this transition, what he did through this hypnosis was he took me back to where my memory was locked about I couldn't go back earlier because the pain gets so great, we black out what happens originally. So what he did is he took me through hypnosis back to the dark, lonely house, and he had me visualize opening the curtains, letting the sun in, and this is all in black and white. My dream, my imagination about what that was in black and white, with a little black and white TV with Wanda. And so he had me open the door, and it was kind of like, what's with the Yellow Brick Road? Wizard of Oz. It's like when the house lands, everything is in black and white. Dorothy opens the door, and it's all in color in Munchkin Land. And that's what he had me do. I opened the door, and he had me visualize this world of color and flowers and beautiful sky, and I walked out into this color world, and that was the way he had me work through this prison I had built in my mind psychologically about my original abuse. So that was kind of a freeing moment, and from there I've been doing therapy for a long time. I don't have much time. If any of you guys are experiencing any kind of this love addiction, avoidance stuff, and you have any questions in the future, I'd be glad to talk to you. One of the reasons I was reticent to share this today was there's a lot of newcomers in here, and this stuff has taken me over 30 years to, I've been in CODA for 22 years, 23 years. The point I want to make is sometimes I've had times in my recovery where I felt so hopeless. When I came in here and we read all this stuff, and I'm like checking off every damn thing in here and thinking, oh, hell, how am I ever going to recover? How am I ever going to get through this? It's so overwhelming and so much stuff, and there's so much work to do around my original abandonment and abuse and my relationships that were painful that I've been through all my life, and my recovery and where I'm at now and where I want to go. So what I want to tell you is there is a solution. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of patience, and it takes diligence to, I imagine myself kind of like over the years, kind of like a guy in the Civil War. There'll be a lot of battles, and I just tell myself to just get back up. There'll be failures. We fail. We make mistakes, but we learn. And mistakes are important because we learn from our mistakes how to reparent ourselves, love ourselves eventually, give ourselves permission to make mistakes. And we continue to go on and learn what we can from our mistakes. And it took me a long time to learn this, to allow myself to care about myself enough to not beat myself up over every little stupid thing I do that I think is so huge in my recovery. like getting into a painful relationship and getting hurt and getting dumped or having to walk away. You know, that's what this platform, this fellowship is for us to support each other and continue this intense work. This is about your life. And the other addictions, I would also mention, if you too have had other addictions that have helped you survive life and this stuff that we have, we need to get our addictions stopped first before we can really get into our codependency work. We can't be acting out an addiction and try and get healthy in CODA. So thanks for listening, and I'm glad I'm done with that.
Thanks, Paul.